August 14th, 2003. It's just after 4 p.m., a totally normal, sweltering summer day in the Northeast.
Yep, people are heading home from work, ACs are blasted everywhere.
And then in just a few seconds, the world's largest machine, it just stops.
It didn't just stop, it was a total collapse.
Yeah.
We're talking 50 million people, completely in the dark, across 8 states and all of Ontario.
You know, it's one of those events where you remember exactly where you were.
Absolutely.
I have friends who had to walk home over the Brooklyn Bridge because the subways were just dead.
And looking at the NERC task force reports, the sources we have for this, the financial cost alone is just staggering.
What are we talking, $6 to $10 billion?
At least. And that's not even touching on the human cost, which, we'll definitely get into.
Right, because the immediate reaction was panic. This was 2003.
Well, yeah. We were less than 2 years out from 9/11. Everyone's first thought was
Terrorism. Had to be. A coordinated attack, a cyber attack, maybe.
And that's the core irony we're really digging into today. It wasn't some grand conspiracy. It was an overgrown tree and a software bug.
A bug that sounds like something that would freeze your laptop, not the entire North American power grid.
Exactly. So our mission today is to unpack what the reports call the 3 Ts.
Trees, technology, and training. Because when you look at the timeline, it's like a slow-motion catastrophe that suddenly goes into hyperdrive.
It's really a story about situational awareness, or I should say the complete and total lack of it.
Okay, so let's set the scene. This whole thing doesn't start in New York City. It starts in a much quieter place.
Northern Ohio. It's a hot day. Temperatures are in the 90s, so the grid is stressed.
Everyone's running their air conditioning.
A huge draw on power. But, and this is important, the system was technically still within its safety limits. It should have been fine.
But the people in charge were basically flying blind. This is the first big point of failure. You've got the local utility, First Energy.
And then you have the regional air traffic controller.
MISO, right, the Midwest Independent System Operator.
Exactly. Their job is to see the big picture, to monitor the whole system. And to do that, they rely on a critical piece of software called a state estimator.
Which sounds incredibly technical.
It is. It takes thousands of data points from the grid and builds a real-time mathematical model. It tells them if the system is stable.
But on that day, it wasn't working.
It just quit. Around 12:15 p.m., it got confused by some minor issues elsewhere and it couldn't solve the math, so it stopped updating.
So for 4 hours, the main watchdog has no idea the system is starting to crumble. They're looking at old data.
They were completely in the dark. But that's just at the high level, the actual physical event, the trigger that happens on the ground with First Energy.
And this is where we meet the main villain of our story.
An invasive species called Ailanthus altissima.
The tree of heaven. It sounds almost biblical.
It's a fitting name for what is essentially a giant, fast-growing weed.
Yeah, I was reading about it. It's incredibly stubborn. If you cut it down, it just sprouts right back up from the roots.
And First Energy had one growing right under a major 345,000-volt power line, the Harding-Chamberlain line.
Okay, so we need to pause on the physics here because it's a common misconception.
Right. People think the tree suddenly grew up into the wire.
But that's not what happened. It was the wire that moved down, not the tree moving up.
Precisely. It's simple thermal expansion. When you push a massive amount of electricity through a wire, it gets hot.
And metal expands when it gets hot.
Right. So since the wire is strung between 2 towers, that extra length has to go somewhere. It sags.
The hotter the day and the more power being used, the lower the wire hangs.
Exactly. And at 3:05 p.m., the Harding-Chamberlain line sagged just enough.
It touched the tree.
Zap. A huge short circuit. And the line's safety system did exactly what it was designed to do. It detected a fault and tripped itself offline to prevent damage.
Okay, so one line goes down. That happens all the time, right? The grid is built with redundancy.
It is. They call it N-1 security. You should be able to lose one major component and keep going.
But this is where the technology part of the failure kicks in.
This is the big one. When that line tripped, a deafening alarm should have gone off in the First Energy control room. Flashing red lights, everything.
Nothing.
Silence. They were sitting there, completely unaware that a major artery of their system had just been severed.
Why? What happened?
Their alarm system had frozen. The software, a GE XA21 system, had hit a bug called a race condition.
A race condition.
Mm-hmm.
That's like when 2 different software processes try to access the same piece of data at the exact same millisecond.
That's it. It's a digital traffic jam, a deadlock.
Yeah.
The software got stuck in an infinite loop, just spinning its wheels.
And the scary part is the operator's screens didn't go black. There was no error message.
Nope. The user interface looked totally fine. It just wasn't updating with new information. It was a silent failure.
It's like your car's gas gauge being stuck on full while you're running out of gas.
Perfect analogy. They had zero situational awareness.
Hmm.
So MESO was blind, First Energy is blind.
And meanwhile, the laws of physics are still very much in effect.
Absolutely. Electricity follows the path of least resistance. That power from the Harding-Chamberlain line had to go somewhere.
So it jumped to the neighboring lines,
Instantly. It overloaded the Hannah-Juniper and the Star-South Canton lines.
which were already running hot because of the heat wave.
And now they get even hotter. They start to sag. They hit other trees. And within about half an hour, they trip offline too.
It's a domino effect. One line fails, which puts stress on the next, which causes it to fail.
It's a cascade. But the question is why it didn't just stay in Ohio. And to understand that, we have to talk about something called reactive power.
Okay, this is the concept that always seems to trip people up.
It is tricky, but it's the absolute key to the whole blackout.
So break it down for us. I saw a beer analogy in the reports.
Yeah, it's a classic for a reason. So imagine you've got a pint of beer. The liquid part, that's your real power. That's the stuff, the watts, that actually does work, like lighting a bulb.
Okay.
But the foam on top, that's your reactive power.
Which seems like a waste.
In a beer, maybe?
Yeah.
But on the grid, that foam is essential. It's the energy needed to create the magnetic fields that move the real power. Think of it like water pressure.
Ah, so you need the pressure to move the water.
Exactly. If your pressure, your reactive power, drops too low, the whole system's voltage collapses. The power stops flowing.
And with all those air conditioners running, which are big motors,
The system was absolutely guzzling reactive power. First Energy was running out of pressure.
the voltage was dropping.
It was sagging badly. And to try and compensate, they pushed one of their generators, East Lake Unit 5, way too hard.
They redlined it.
And at 1:30 p.m., it tripped offline to protect itself. So now you've just lost one of your main pressure pumps. The grid is becoming critically unstable.
And this is when the dam breaks. The power can't get through Ohio anymore, so it looks for a new path.
It takes the long way around.
Yeah.
A massive surge of energy, we're talking gigawatts, swings out in a huge counterclockwise loop,
Around Lake Erie.
all the way around Lake Erie, through Pennsylvania, up into New York, and then arcing back into Ontario and Michigan. It was an electrical tsunami.
Wow.
And that surge runs right into the final fatal flaw, the Zone 3 relays.
These are basically just safety switches, right?
They are, but they're kind of blunt instruments. They're designed to look far down the line for major faults.
And they saw this giant wave of power coming from Ohio.
And they misinterpreted it.
Hmm.
They couldn't tell the difference between a massive power surge and a catastrophic short circuit right next to them.
So they panic.
They panicked. Their programming basically said, danger, shut it all down to protect the equipment. So they started tripping. They started opening up the grid.
And once that began, it was just unstoppable.
The whole thing unraveled in about 3 minutes. From 4:08 to 4:11 p.m., 265 power plants disconnected themselves from the grid to survive. The grid broke into little islands, and then darkness.
3 minutes for 50 million people. It's just terrifying.
It really shows you that the grid isn't just a collection of wires. It's one single interconnected machine. And if one part starts to wobble, the whole thing can fly apart.
I want to shift gears a little bit because we've covered the technical how, but the so what is just as interesting because when you look back, there's this strange nostalgia around the blackout.
The blackout parties, the sense of community.
Exactly. People grilling on the sidewalk, sharing food before it went bad, New Yorkers directing traffic. It's often framed as this moment of, civic pride,
It gets contrasted a lot with the 1977 blackout in New York.
which was total chaos, looting, arson. It was seen as a sign of urban decay, whereas 2003 was seen as a sign of resilience.
But that feel-good story hides a much darker reality. When you dig into the public health data, a different picture emerges.
The NYC Department of Health study.
That's the one. They looked at observed deaths versus predicted deaths for that period, and there was a clear, statistically significant spike in mortality.
It wasn't just heat stroke.
No, it is the failure of medical equipment. We don't think about how much our health depends on a stable power supply.
Things like nebulizers for asthma, CPAP machines for sleep apnea, dialysis.
All of it runs on electricity. If you don't have a backup generator or a battery, a blackout can become a life-threatening emergency very, very quickly.
And there's a real inequality to that vulnerability, isn't there? The reports noted that the neighborhoods with the highest concentration of people needing that equipment were often low-income areas.
That's the inequality of resilience. If you live in a fancy high-rise, your building probably has a backup generator. If you live on the 20th floor of a public housing project, you probably don't. The elevator stopped working, you're trapped.
So the people who are already the most vulnerable medically are also the least equipped to handle the infrastructure failing.
It's a brutal reality. The communal spirit is a great story, but for many people, it was a desperate struggle.
So after the lights came back on, the big question became, how do we prevent this from ever happening again?
Well, the regulatory world changed overnight. Before 2003, you had NERC, the North American Electric Reliability Council.
And council is the key word there. It was voluntary.
It was basically an industry club.
Yeah.
They made recommendations about things like tree trimming, but there were no real teeth. A utility could just ignore them if it was too expensive.
It seems insane that the entire economy was running on an honor system.
It was. But after 2003, Congress passed the Energy Policy Act of 2005. NERC became the North American Electric Reliability Corporation.
A small name change, but a huge shift in power.
A massive shift. They got regulatory authority. They can now fine utilities up to $1 million a day for every violation.
It's not a suggestion anymore.
Not at all. And they created mandatory standards. The most famous one is FAC 003.
The Vegetation Management Standard.
Yep. It dictates exactly how much clearance there has to be between a tree and a power line. No exceptions.
But how did they actually enforce that on the ground? You can't just pass a law and make trees stop growing.
Better technology.
Yeah.
We moved from being reactive to being predictive. Utilities started using things like LiDAR.
Laser radar.
Right. They fly it over the power lines on a helicopter or a drone, and it creates a perfect 3D map of all the vegetation. They can see a problem branch months before it gets too close.
So it's about getting ahead of the problem instead of just responding to it.
Exactly. And on the software side, those state estimators, the things that failed, are now mandatory and have to have backups. You can't fly blind anymore.
So the million-dollar question, could it happen again? Are we safe now?
The exact same failure. A single tree in Ohio taking down the whole Northeast. Probably not. We've hardened the system against that specific failure mode, but
There's always a but.
the grid today is so much more complex than it was in 2003. Back then, power was simple. It flowed one way, from a big power plant to your home.
But now with renewables, you've got solar on rooftops pushing power back into the grid, wind farms that are intermittent.
Exactly. The supply is variable. The challenge of balancing the system, of keeping that foam in the beer just right, is exponentially harder.
And we have climate change on top of it all. Hotter hot days, more intense storms.
So while we solve the 2003 problem, the environment the grid operates in is becoming more and more hostile. The challenge of situational awareness is greater than ever.
It really just comes back to that central idea. The grid isn't magic. We just plug in our phones and expect it to work. But behind that wall socket is this incredibly fragile, continent-spanning dance of physics.
And it requires constant, unrelenting vigilance.
So I want to leave our listeners with one final thought, and it ties back to the human cost we talked about. We've spent billions of dollars on better wires and smarter software. We hardened the grid.
But did we harden the people?
Exactly. We know from the data that poverty and health are huge risk factors in a blackout. So if the grid goes down again, and eventually something will knock it down.
Are we doing enough to make sure our communities are resilient?
Or are we just hoping the technology holds this time?
That's the real question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because when the lights go out, the line between an inconvenience and a tragedy is often just a matter of resources.
And that's a problem that no amount of LiDAR can fix. Something to think about. That's all for this deep dive. We'll see you on the next one.